They thought I would stay quiet after being restructured, but I kept copies of every transaction. I discovered a $73 million discrepancy, and they called it an overreaction. 3 weeks later, the federal audit team walked in with a search warrant, and they didn't need to ask who would guide them. I had left everything in the secure vault. My name is Madeline Pierce. At 38, I've built my career on numbers that don't lie, even when people do. For the past 3 years, I served as head of risk control at Silver Grove Holdings, a prestigious asset management firm headquartered in Denver, Colorado. My colleagues called me the immovable object, behind my back the woman who wouldn't budge when numbers didn't align. I took it as a compliment. The morning everything changed was unremarkable. Denver's October sky stretched blue and cloudless over the glass-walled Silver Grove building as I rode the elevator to the 34th floor. My team had flagged an irregularity in a development project in Arizona, and I'd stayed up until 2 a.m. reviewing the preliminary findings. Something felt off, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what. Not yet. "Good morning, Ms. Pierce," said Ellie, the department assistant, handing me a steaming cup of black coffee as I walked in. "The quarterly risk assessment meeting has been moved to 3 p.m. Mr. Harrington wants to review the Westlake portfolio first." I nodded, grateful for the coffee. "Thanks, Ellie. Any messages from the Arizona data team?" "Yes, they uploaded the revised projections you requested. And Ms. Cross wants to see you before the executive meeting." I paused. Valerie Cross, our new COO, had been with Silver Grove for only 4 months, brought in after our wildly successful second quarter. She came with stellar recommendations from Blackwater Capital, though rumors of compliance issues had followed her departure. Nothing proven, nothing public, just whispers in tight financial circles. "Did she say what about?" "Just that it's regarding your excessive auditing protocols," her words, not mine. Ellie added quickly. I smiled tightly. "Got it, I'll see her at 11. My office was a corner space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Rocky Mountains. Despite 3 years at Silver Grove, I'd kept it minimally decorated: a desk, ergonomic chair, 2 visitor seats, and a single framed photograph of my father on graduation day. His arm around my shoulders, his face beaming with pride. Dad had been a forensic accountant for the IRS for 30 years. "Numbers never lie, Maddie," he'd say. "People do. Your job is to make the numbers tell you where the lies are hidden." I set my coffee down and woke up my computer, logging into Sentinel, the AI-enhanced auditing system I'd designed after joining Silver Grove. The program had been my condition for taking the job. 3 years ago, Silver Grove had lost $58 million due to risk assessment failures. They'd needed someone to rebuild their internal controls from the ground up, and I'd demanded complete autonomy to do it right. Sentinel had saved the company $40 million in its first year by flagging high-risk investments before they became catastrophes. By year 3, we'd become the fastest-growing private asset management firm in the Western United States. Our CEO, James Harrington, had featured me in the annual report, calling Sentinel the guardian angel of Silver Grove's spectacular growth. Now Valerie Cross wanted to discuss my excessive protocols. I knew what that meant. New leadership always wants to streamline. Streamline meant shortcuts. Shortcuts meant risk. And risk, unmanaged, meant disaster. I pulled up the Arizona project files. Silver Grove was considering a $145 million investment in a master-planned community outside Phoenix luxury homes. A golf course, shopping center, the works. The development company, Meridian Partners, had projected an 18% return over 5 years. The numbers looked solid at first glance. But Sentinel had flagged a series of anomalies that needed investigation. Cost estimates for materials seemed inflated by comparison to similar projects. The land acquisition price was 30% above market value. And something about Meridian Partners felt off. They'd materialized 18 months ago with an impressive portfolio, but little history. I dug deeper. Cross-referencing material costs with current market rates, examining property assessments, and running Meridian's principles through our database. By 10:30, my stomach was in knots. The construction costs were inflated by over 50%. The land had been purchased through a shell company at market rate, then sold to Meridian at a 30% markup, and Meridian Partners. Its primary stakeholder was registered as Westward Investments LLC, a company owned by Alexander Reeves, Valerie Cross's former colleague at Blackwater Capital. But the real bombshell came when I traced the ownership of the construction company slated to build the development. Azure Construction was majority owned by Phoenix Development Holdings, which was in turn controlled by none other than Richard Davenport Silvergrove's Deputy Director of Real Estate Acquisitions. It was a classic self-dealing scheme. If approved, the project would funnel approximately $73 million of our investors' money into inflated costs that would line the pockets of insiders. The projected returns were fiction. I saved my findings, backed them up to my secured server, and headed to Valerie's office. Despite the gravity of what I'd discovered, I felt calm. This was why I had built Sentinel. This was why I was here. Valerie's office made mine look austere. Original artwork adorned the walls. A plush seating area occupied one corner, and her desk, a massive slab of black marble, dominated the space. She looked up from her computer as I entered, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Madeline, come in. Coffee." She gestured to an elaborate espresso machine. "No, thank you. I've already had my quota for the morning." "Sit, please." She pointed to one of the chairs across from her desk. "I wanted to discuss the quarterly review process. Some of the portfolio managers have expressed concerns about the depth of your team's inquiries." I sat, keeping my expression neutral. The quarterly review process follows the protocols approved by the board last year. They've been extremely effective. Effective, yes, but perhaps inefficient. Her smile remained fixed. "We've had complaints that your team requests excessive documentation, conducts redundant interviews, and delays approvals on time-sensitive investments. Those redundancies caught 3 major compliance issues last quarter alone, saving us potential regulatory penalties and reputational damage." Valerie leaned forward. "Madeline, I understand your commitment to thoroughness. It's admirable. But in this market, agility is just as important as caution. We can't afford to miss opportunities because we're buried in paperwork. We can't afford to rush into fraudulent investments either," I replied evenly. "Speaking of which, I've identified some serious concerns with the Arizona project." Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Oh, what concerns?" I outlined my findings: the inflated costs, the markup on the land purchase, the connection between Meridian Partners and her former colleague, and finally, the ownership link between the construction company and our own Richard Davenport. As I spoke, Valerie's demeanor cooled. By the time I mentioned Davenport, her eyes had hardened to flint. "These are very serious allegations. Madeline, do you have concrete evidence?" "I have the documentation showing the ownership structures, the comparative market analysis for materials and land values, and the projected loss to our investors, approximately $73 million if we proceed as planned." She stared at me for a long moment. "Send me your findings. I'll review them personally. I've already prepared a report for the executive committee meeting this afternoon." "No." Her response was immediate and sharp. "This requires discreet handling. We can't throw around accusations of self-dealing without absolute certainty. Richard Davenport has been with Silvergrove for 12 years. His reputation is beyond reproach. The ownership records are clear. Valerie, this isn't about reputation. It's about preventing fraud." She stood, signaling the end of our meeting. "Send me your findings. I'll investigate personally and determine next steps. In the meantime, delay any discussion with the executive committee. That's an order, Madeline." I left her office with a growing sense of unease. In my experience, discreet handling often meant buried concerns and silenced whistleblowers. But I'd faced pushback before. The truth would prevail. It always did when the numbers were on your side. Back in my office, I forwarded my findings to Valerie, but I also took precautions. 3 years ago, when negotiating my position at Silvergrove, I'd insisted on an unusual clause in my contract in cases of suspected fraud that remained unaddressed by regular channels. I had authority to preserve data under personal audit control. It was my insurance policy, my protection against being forced to participate in a cover-up. I activated this protocol now, backing up all relevant files, documentation, and Sentinel's analysis to a secure, encrypted server that only I could access. Then I called Marcus Wong, my deputy and most trusted team member. Marcus, I need you to clear your schedule this afternoon. Sure thing, boss. What's up? I can't discuss it over the phone. Meet me in Audit Room B at 1. Bring Emily from legal. The executive committee meeting at 3 was tense. I sat silently as various portfolio managers presented their updates. When it came time for the risk assessment review, I provided the standard quarterly metrics, but made no mention of the Arizona project. Valerie caught my eye across the table and gave a slight nod of approval. James Harrington, our silver-haired CEO, frowned at the end of my presentation. Nothing on the Phoenix development. I thought that was slated for final approval today. We're still conducting our final review, I replied carefully. Some additional documentation came in this morning that requires thorough assessment. Anything concerning, James pressed. Before I could answer, Valerie interjected. Just routine due diligence. James, Madeline's team is being characteristically thorough. We should have final approval by next week. James looked between us, clearly sensing the tension. All right, but I want that project greenlit ASAP. The board is expecting it in the Q4 projections. After the meeting, Valerie cornered me in the hallway. Thank you for your discretion. I've reviewed your findings and spoken with Richard. There's a simple explanation for the ownership structure. It's a blind trust he established before joining Silver Grove. He had no knowledge of the connection. I stared at her incredulously. A blind trust that coincidentally invested in a company that's about to receive a massive contract from his employer. And what about the inflated costs, the land markup, the connection to your former colleague? You're seeing conspiracies where there are merely coincidences. Madeline. The cost estimates are within acceptable ranges for luxury developments. The land was priced at market value for its development potential. And Alex Reeves's involvement is hardly surprising. He specializes in Southwest real estate development. I can show you the comparative analysis. Enough. Her voice was quiet but sharp. I've made my decision. The project proceeds as planned. I'll sign off on the risk assessment myself. You don't have the authority to bypass risk control protocols. Her smile was cold. Check your email. Madeline. The board approved emergency protocol modifications this morning. In time-sensitive situations, the COO can now provide executive approval on risk assessments. My blood ran cold. You changed the protocols without consulting me. That undermines the entire control structure. The changes are minimal and necessary for operational efficiency. Your team will still conduct all standard reviews. She placed a hand on my arm. Don't make this personal. Madeline, you've built an impressive system, but no system is perfect. Sometimes human judgment must prevail over algorithms. I pulled away from her touch. When those algorithms are detecting fraud, human judgment should be to investigate further, not dismiss the evidence. Be careful with accusations of fraud, Madeline. They can damage careers, including yours. The threat wasn't subtle. I returned to my office and found Marcus waiting. What happened? He asked, taking in my expression. They're bypassing us. Valerie got the board to modify the protocols. She can now override risk assessment holds. Can she do that? Apparently she can. And she's dismissing all our findings on the Arizona project as coincidences and misinterpretations. Marcus leaned against my desk. So what's our next move? I took a deep breath. We document everything, every finding, every communication, every override. We continue following the protocols to the letter, and we watch for what happens next. What happened next was swift and calculated. Over the following week, I found myself gradually excluded from key meetings. My access to certain Sentinel modules became temporarily restricted for system updates. Emails about the Arizona project stopped coming to me entirely. Then came the restructuring announcement. James Harrington called me to his office on a Friday afternoon, his expression grave as I entered. "Madeline, please sit down." He gestured to the chairs across from his desk. "I want to thank you for your extraordinary contributions to Silver Grove. The Sentinel system has transformed our risk management capabilities. I recognize the preamble to a firing, but..." He sighed. "But as we scale, we need to evolve our organizational structure. The board has approved a restructuring of the risk management division. We're creating a new position, Chief Risk Innovation Officer, focused on developing next-generation tools while separating day-to-day risk operations." "And you want me in this new role?" I said flatly. "It leverages your strongest skills, Madeline. You're brilliant at systems design. This allows you to focus there without the administrative burden of managing the entire department." Translation: we're taking away your authority while keeping your expertise. I'd be designing tools I couldn't deploy, creating systems I couldn't control. Who will run risk operations? James couldn't quite meet my eyes. Marcus Wong will become acting head of risk operations, reporting directly to Valerie. They were using my own deputy to replace me. Clever. I see. And if I decline this new position, your contract guarantees 6 months severance, plus extended benefits. We'd part on excellent terms with a strong recommendation letter. I nodded slowly, my mind racing through options. If I resigned, I'd lose access to Sentinel and all evidence of the Arizona fraud. If I accepted the demotion, I'd be powerless to prevent it, but might maintain enough access to document the scheme as it unfolded. I'll need time to consider. Of course. Take the weekend. We'll talk on Monday. James stood, offering his hand. Whatever you decide, Madeline, your work here has been invaluable. I shook his hand, wondering if he knew what Valerie was doing, if he was complicit or merely oblivious. It didn't matter. By Monday morning, I'd made my decision. I accepted the new position, but negotiated continued access to Sentinel's core functions as essential to my innovation role. They agreed, not realizing I'd already secured all the evidence I needed. For the next 2 weeks, I played along, attending the required meetings, drafting proposals for next-generation risk tools, and watching as the Arizona project received rapid approval. Meanwhile, I prepared my counter-move, using my father's old contacts. I arranged a confidential meeting with Samuel Torres, a senior investigator with the Federal Securities Compliance Unit. We met at a coffee shop in Boulder, away from financial district eyes. Torres was a compact man with shrewd eyes and a methodical manner that reminded me of my father. I handed him a flash drive containing a carefully organized set of documents, ownership records, comparative cost analyses, email communications, and Sentinel's algorithmic findings. This points to approximately $73 million in fraudulent valuation on a single project. I explained, but I suspect it's not isolated. The sudden protocol changes suggest they're establishing a pathway for similar schemes. Torres reviewed the materials with careful attention. This is compelling, Ms. Pierce. But why come to us instead of internal channels? I tried internal channels. They responded by restructuring me out of my position and overriding the controls. And you're still employed there. For now, in a diminished capacity. He nodded thoughtfully. We'll need to verify these findings independently. If confirmed, we'll proceed with an investigation. That may include a warrant to access Silver Grove systems directly. When that happens, they'll know someone talked. Are you concerned about retaliation? I smiled grimly. I'm counting on it. My contract has specific protections for whistleblowers, and I've documented every step of their response to my findings. Torres closed his laptop. We'll be in touch, Ms. Pierce. In the meantime, maintain normal operations. Don't access or copy any additional files that might alert them. Understood. But there's one more thing you should know. I leaned forward. Sentinel maintains an automated audit trail of all overrides and protocol violations. That trail is backed up to a secure server every night at 2 a.m. The access credentials are in the documents I provided. Torres raised an eyebrow. You built in a failsafe. I built in accountability. Numbers don't lie, Agent Torres, but people do. The next 3 weeks were an exercise in patience and acting. I watched as Marcus, clearly uncomfortable with his new role, signed off on each stage of the Arizona project. I attended strategy meetings where Valerie presented the development as a cornerstone of our Q4 growth. I even contributed to discussions about how to market the project to our premium investors. All the while, I waited for the other shoe to drop. It finally did on a Wednesday morning in December during Silver Grove's annual Investor Summit. 200 of our top clients had gathered in the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Denver for presentations on market trends and investment opportunities. James Harrington was midway through his keynote address when the doors at the back of the room opened. 6 people in dark suits entered, led by Samuel Torres. They moved quietly along the perimeter of the room as James continued speaking, oblivious to their presence. I watched from my seat in the third row as they approached the stage. One of them handed a document to a security guard, who reluctantly approached James and whispered in his ear. James faltered mid-sentence, his face draining of color as he looked up to see Torres displaying a badge. "Ladies and gentlemen," Torres announced to the now murmuring crowd. "I apologize for the interruption. I'm Senior Investigator Samuel Torres with the Federal Securities Compliance Unit. We have a warrant to access certain records at Silver Grove Holdings. This is not a public matter, and you are free to continue your event. We simply need access to specific personnel and systems." The room erupted in whispers. James, ashen-faced, managed to regain some composure. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. I'm sure this is a routine compliance matter that we can address quickly. Let's take a 30-minute break, and then we'll continue with our program." As the confused investors began rising from their seats, Torres approached Valerie Cross, who had been seated in the front row. I couldn't hear their exchange, but I saw the shock on her face, followed quickly by a calculating look as her eyes scanned the room and landed on me. The realization dawned in her expression, followed by cold fury. She started toward me, but an agent stepped between us, directing her to accompany Torres. As she was led away, she called out over her shoulder, "This is a mistake that will cost everyone in this room millions. Ask Madeline Pierce what she's done." All eyes turned to me. I remained seated, my expression calm. James hurried over, confusion and anger warring on his face. "Madeline, what is happening? What does Valerie mean?" "They're investigating the Arizona project. James, the one I warned you about 3 weeks ago before I was restructured." His face paled further. "You went to the authorities without coming to me first. I came to you. I came to Valerie. I presented evidence of fraud worth $73 million. You chose to sideline me instead of investigating. Those were unsubstantiated allegations. Then you have nothing to worry about." I stood, straightening my jacket. "If I'm wrong, the investigation will clear Silver Grove. If I'm right, you should be grateful someone caught it before the damage spread." An agent approached us. "Mr. Harrington, we need you to direct us to your systems administrator. We have a warrant to access specific financial records." James looked from the agent to me, betrayal clear in his eyes. "Our systems administrator is Derek Huang. His office is on the 32nd floor." He turned back to me. "The board will hear about this. Madeline." "I'm counting on it, James. In fact, I've prepared a complete briefing for them. They should know exactly how their risk controls were compromised." As James was led away, Marcus approached, his expression a mix of awe and concern. "You knew this was coming." I hoped it wouldn't be necessary, but yes, I was prepared. "They'll fire you for this." I smiled sadly. "They already did. Marcus, they just hadn't told me yet." The next few hours were controlled chaos. The investor event was postponed indefinitely. Federal agents took control of the Sentinel system, using the access protocols I'd provided to Torres. Key executives, including Richard Davenport, were interviewed in separate conference rooms. And I spent 3 hours walking the investigative team through the evidence I'd compiled. By evening, the first consequences became visible. Valerie Cross was escorted from the building, her company devices confiscated, Richard Davenport followed shortly after. And around 7 p.m., James Harrington called me to his office. Unlike our previous meeting, he didn't invite me to sit. He stood behind his desk, looking every day of his 63 years. The board has terminated your employment, effective immediately. Security will escort you to clear your personal belongings. I had expected this. On what grounds? Breach of fiduciary duty. You disclosed confidential information to regulatory authorities without exhausting internal remedies. I followed every protocol. James, I reported the fraud through proper channels. When those channels failed, my contract explicitly permitted me to preserve evidence and report potential securities violations. Your contract is terminated for cause. You'll receive no severance or benefits. I nodded calmly. I anticipated that position. My attorney will be contacting you tomorrow regarding wrongful termination and whistleblower protection violations. In the meantime, I've prepared a statement for the board. I placed a sealed envelope on his desk. It details exactly what I found when I reported it and how those reports were handled. It also includes my personal email address. Should any board members wish to discuss how $73 million of investor funds were nearly misappropriated under their oversight. James didn't touch the envelope. You've destroyed what we built here, Madeline. The reputational damage alone. I didn't create the fraud. James, I uncovered it. The damage to Silver Grove was done the moment Valerie and Richard decided to use investor funds as their personal piggy bank. You could have handled this internally. I tried. You chose Valerie's side. He looked away. Get out, Madeline. Security is waiting. I left without another word, my head high as I walked past curious, whispering colleagues. The security guard assigned to escort me was Tony, who had checked my ID every morning for 3 years. Tough break, Ms. Pierce, he said quietly as we rode the elevator down. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Thanks, Tony. Take care of yourself. Outside, the December air was biting cold. Snow had begun to fall, softening the hard edges of the city. I walked 6 blocks to where my car was parked, each step feeling lighter than the last. By the time I reached it, I was smiling despite everything. The aftermath unfolded over the following weeks and months. Valerie Cross was indicted on charges of securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Richard Davenport turned state's evidence, revealing that the Arizona scheme was one of 3 similar projects Valerie had orchestrated since her arrival. Alexander Reeves from Meridian Partners was charged as a co-conspirator. James Harrington resigned as CEO, claiming he wanted to spend more time with family while denying any knowledge of the fraud. Silver Grove's planned IPO was indefinitely postponed, and the company's valuation dropped by nearly $400 million as investors pulled their funds. As for me, I never returned to Silver Grove. The wrongful termination suit was settled out of court for an undisclosed sum, though I can say it was substantial enough to fund my next venture. I launched Audit, a startup providing independent AI-powered auditing services to nonprofits and mid-sized businesses that couldn't afford robust internal controls. My father, retired now but sharp as ever, joined as an advisor. Always knew you'd end up fighting the good fight, he told me as we set up our modest office. Numbers don't lie, but they need honest people to make them tell the truth. 11 months after the Silver Grove raid, I received an unexpected call from Congresswoman Eleanor Martinez, chair of the Financial Oversight Committee. She'd followed the Silver Grove case closely and was impressed by the Sentinel system's ability to detect sophisticated fraud schemes. We need that kind of technical expertise on the committee, she told me. Would you consider serving as a special advisor on financial technology and control systems? I accepted. Today, I divide my time between growing Auditorix and helping shape national policies on financial transparency and fraud prevention. Last month, I testified before Congress on the role of AI in detecting white-collar crime, and my case study on Silver Grove is now required reading in several MBA programs' ethics courses. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Valerie had simply listened to my concerns, if James had backed my investigation, if Silver Grove had chosen integrity over expedience. But the numbers never lie, even when people try to hide them. In the end, the truth always finds its way to the surface. Sometimes it just needs someone willing to show it the way. I still have the framed photo of my father at my graduation. It sits on my desk at Auditorix. Next to a new edition, a small plaque inscribed with a quote from Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis: "Sunlight is the best disinfectant." In the world of high finance, that sunlight often comes in the form of a person willing to stand firm when the numbers don't add up. Someone willing to risk everything to protect the truth. Someone who remembers that behind every spreadsheet, every algorithm, every investment, there are real people whose livelihoods and futures depend on those numbers being right. That's why I do what I do. Because $73 million isn't just a number. It's thousands of retirements, college funds, and dreams. And no one has the right to steal those dreams, no matter how powerful they think they are